A very good evening, guys. I hope all of you guys are doing good. Uh, if I'm audible to you, can you please write yes in the chat box? Can you please write yes in the chat box if I'm audible to you? Super. We have already received hundreds of yes. Okay. If the screen is visible, can you write okay? If the screen is visible, can you write okay? Perfect. We are good. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Thank you. We are good. A big good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for sparing some time. Uh, Typically, we tend to start our session 10 minutes late. So we thought how to best utilize the 10 minutes. So we thought that we'll put the speaker's profile in the first 10 minutes so that we don't waste the actual time in talking about the people. And if you see here, we have Vivek, who's probably one of the biggest guys in the country as far as algo trading space is concerned. We have Milind, we have Ayush. Milind and Ayush again are achievers in their respective field at the whatever age they are in, and probably on the same path which Vivek started around 10 years back. If you see the team, we have 3 stars. We have Vivek, we have Milind, we have Ayush. I'm the only odd one out. So I'll try my best to match their standard and capability. So let us start off with the day. As we all know, we want to talk about finance and we talk about algo trading. Again, in algo trading, there are two levels to it. One is a pure quant side to it, and the other is a pure software side to it. So here we have Ayush who will be talking about the quant side. We have Milind who will be talking about the software side. These two guys will give you a student mindset, which is on how to crack these places, these companies. And Vivek here will give you a recruiter mindset. So the idea behind this session was to give you both sides of the story, the recruiter story and the student story. So let's get on with the session. Here is a question up front for you guys. A hurricane is approaching Gulf of Mexico, where there are many oil rigs and refineries. If this hurricane hits, it will completely smash Gulf of Mexico. If you have this info, what will you do to the oil market? I am releasing a poll right now. You'll have a question in your screen. Just write what option will you choose, buy, sell, or something else. Let's finish the exercise fast because we'll do something interesting. Remember, you are trading the market, not the companies. You are trading oil market. We'll keep the poll open for another 10 seconds and then we'll close this. Okay, 44% of you have said that you will buy it, 51% have said sell it, and 6% have said that they will do something else. Now, I just want to tell you something, that if the oil rigs and refineries are located in Gulf of Mexico, if the hurricane hits Gulf of Mexico, it will hit the rigs and refineries. We get petrol in our car, in our bike, in our buses, in our planes after they get refined in these rigs. And if they don't refine the petrol, if they don't refine the oil, we will not have it at our end. Supply will get affected, but the demand of the world will still be the same. And the supply becomes low and demand still remains the same, something happens to the price, which we will talk very soon in the supply demand curve. Now, in the same scenario, you get the next piece of information, which is like this. The hurricane that was approaching Gulf of Mexico completely changed its course, and it didn't even touch the Gulf at all. You were trading the oil market, you got the information. That was the first information, was a hurricane is approaching the Gulf of Mexico. You made some trades. The market reacted on the information. After half an hour or an hour or so, the next piece of information came that the hurricane which was approaching Gulf completely changed its course and didn't even touch Gulf at all. Now with this piece of information, what will you do to the market? I am releasing the second poll. Think a little and then answer. Remember, you are trading oil market. You are not trading the companies. Okay, we'll close the poll in another 5 seconds. Very interesting. 60% of you have said that they will sell it, 30% have said buy it, and 12% have said something else. Guys, the reason why we kept this front of us, because we wanted you to think like a trader and make you understand the game is all about common sense. The trading, the intuition to trade comes from the common sense. Now, how much to trade, when to trade, when to square is a little bit of fin knowledge that you need, but the basis of the entire trading industry is actually common sense and psychology. And if you this, I was trying to allude you towards something which is called supply demand curve. Now, exactly how does this works? A very simple thing. If the supply is more, that price tend to go up, and if the demand is more, the price tends to go up. Now, if you see it, look around you, the number of IITs in India are probably only 17, of which the older ones are only 9. If you really practically see, the supply is very, very less. Again, if you see when an Amazon or a Microsoft comes, they don't come and recruit 50, 60, 100 people from your college. They recruit very, very less, and that's why they are always in big demand, because the supply is very, very less, the demand is big. Same is the game when it comes to these markets. Now, I asked you, the first question was, if the supply gets hit, what will you do to the oil market? If the supply is low and the demand remains the same, the price tends to go up. Oh, this is wrong here. I think I've done some. Yeah, this is right here. But in the second one, I said if the hurricane completely changes its course, which means the supply remains unaffected, the market will come back to normal. What an investor will do is, investor will probably buy first, and once the second piece of information comes, it will sell. It will make money once in the entire trade. But what a trader would do it will buy first, and when the second piece of information comes, at that point it will double sell, and when the market comes back to normal, it will again buy to square the trade. And that is the absolutely rudimentary and fundamental difference between an investor and a trader. A trader tend to make money from both sides of an opportunity. Investor probably ride only one curve. A trader will ride both the curves. While the market is going up, he or she will ride the curve. While the market is going down, he or she will ride the curve with a fresh trade. And that is what is the difference between the mentality of an investor and a trader. Now, there's a hedger inside each one of you, and let me show you how. Typically, if you are one of the investors who got a lot of money, would you put all your money in one market? Probably not. If the market goes down, you lose a lot of money. So typically, you will choose two markets. In Indian context, the two markets that are chosen are equity and gold market. Why are they chosen? Because there's an inverse correlation. When equity market goes up, gold market tends to go down. So typically, you will create a formula in which you will buy both equity and gold, because if equity will go up, you will make money in what you have bought in equity. You will lose money in what you have bought in gold, but net you will lose less, or probably net you will balance it out. This entire strategy in which you are trading two different strategies to minimize your loss is called hedging. Now, why I'm talking about hedging right now is because there's a hedger inside each one of you, which typically takes birth during the placement season. How does it go? Let me show it to you. As a student, you aspire to go for higher studies, Harvard, Stanford, Chicago, Booth. UC Berkeley, whatever it is. And you also eye for placements. One is career, one is absolutely studies. But you want to hedge your position, because if Harvard doesn't get cracked, then probably Google will. If Google doesn't get cracked, then probably you'll enter a top B school or a top MS school. That's a hedging. Now there are some even more smarter people in your college who think like this. They will write GRE. They will also write CAT and GMAT. They will sit for core placements. They will sit for non-core placements. And back in their hostel room, they also think of starting their own startups or entrepreneurship. Now, I'll tell you what, this terminology is called hedging the hedge. It doesn't exist in the financial world. It only exists in the Indian student ecosystem. Takes birth every July, dies by February, stays dormant for 5-6 months, again gets back to life as far as July or September, August, September is concerned. Now let's get into the trading profession and industry, and let's understand what it is. Typically, the roles that is offered in trading as far as India is concerned, or typically as far as your college are concerned, is trading, which is typically buying and selling, research, which is trading advisory services, and risk. It is managing exposure in financial markets. The way I understand, only this role is offered as far as your college is concerned. And very frankly, if you take a suggestion, if you get this role, don't take it. Because as far as IIT Bombay is concerned, taking up this role fresh out of college is not worth. The role is not worth the salt. No matter what happens, don't take this role for sure. And no one will offer you this role fresh out of college. This should be your starting point, eventually taking you here. That's how the ladder is. In trading, there are typically 3 profiles that comes to your college. Manual trading, system that involves human decision making for trading. Companies like Futures First, Axela, OSTC. To some extent, Flow Trader also comes for this role. Algo trading, using computer programs for trading at a speed and frequency that is impossible for a human. Companies like QuadEye, AlphaGrep, Tar Research comes for this role, and they also come for this role. Using quantitative analysis, mathematics, probabilistic models, statistical models to doing number crunching and implementing the same in the markets. We have a couple of QuadEye people and one of the AlphaGrep people in the panel today who will be probably speaking more about this. How your career grows, I've given a span of 5 years. If you survive, and very frankly, there's a very big question mark whether you will survive or not, because in trading world, survival is a very big deal. If you get to cross the probation period, you should give yourself a pat on the shoulder and you should hit the nearest bar, because you have done something which is absolutely out of the world. Clearing probation is a very big deal in a trading company. But if you do so, in the first 2 years, you can expect that you start trading one product and then start trading maybe a couple of more, maybe 3 products. Typically, you would see a trader will have 2-3 different monitors. That's because he or she is trading 2-3 different markets. I know one of the top traders, one of our very good friends of mine. He has got 11 monitors in front of him, and he trades 18 different products. He trades 6-7 different exchanges, 18 different products, and he's one of the top traders as far as globe is concerned. If you survive the first 2 years, then you get to scale. You trade multiple products with high volume, and in 5th year, managerial opportunities can come. And this is when everything is seen with rose-colored glasses. You are doing exactly everything right as far as your trading career is concerned. But what if things don't work out? What's the exit opportunity? Typically, if you have not survived in a trading environment, it is advised not to enter another trading company, because if you could not click in a company A, it is a high possibility you will not click in company B also. So the exit opportunity that I have seen is higher studies MBA. The top B schools of the world open their door, because trading is a very cool profession to be in. You have been into the world of finance, the most revered world to be in as far as globally things are concerned. And second, you bring a huge diversity in the class. You can become a financial research or a junior risk profile. Typically, banks like Stancy, HDFC, ICICI recruit people for these ones. Or you can get into analytics. I have seen that almost 60-70 people who left trading eventually became very successful data scientists in their life, because analytics firms tend to hire them, tend to pick them just like that. So these are the growth opportunity and these are the exit opportunity as far as finance is concerned. Now, why you should do trading? Simple reason is this. One can say whatever one can say, but the simple reason is you should do trading because you want to earn money. And when I say money, I mean absolutely filthy amount of money. At probably, I won't say very early in your life, but what one will take 30, 35 years to make, you should be able to make that in 20 years if you stick and if you hold your ground strong as far as trading is concerned. Lucrative return potential, fast-paced and high-growth driven environment. It's an extremely risky profession to start your career, but it also could be an ideal start to delve into a corporate life. It's like boom or bust. There is nothing in between. Either you will absolutely kill it or you will leave it very, very soon. There is no in between. It's binary 1 or 0 as far as trading is concerned. You cannot be an average trader. Typically, the way I've seen, either you will be a fantastic trader or you will just leave the profession because that's how the profession is. When I was in this profession, very clearly the CEO told us that they only want Sachin Tendulkar. We want 11 Sachin Tendulkars in our team, and there is no space for Mahendra Singh Dhoni also. That's how it works. That is how sharp edge. That is how uh, needle point this entire industry works. Typically, if you see in any corporates, when they put up competitions, they have, if at all they are a good corporate, they might give a car as a gift. I want you to know that I know of a trading company, which is an India-based trading company, which had Rolls Royce as the winning competition. That's big stakes are. Of course, it was not given. They have branches across the world, so it was not an Indian trader did not win it. Someone outside won it. He's an Indian who doesn't live in India, but this is how the stake how high stake the game is all about. Now, why you should not choose trading? It's not easy money. A lot of time people say it's easy money. Don't do that mistake in an interview also. I mean, this is the best and the shortest way by which you can rile up your interview when you say that you can make quick money. There is no quick money that trading exists. The person who has come to recruit, he must have literally sweat and bled by his nose to be in the company, to be in the market, and to be in a recruiter's position. So the moment you say quick money, I mean, you will really anger the person. It's not at all quick money. It's not for safe players. If you have been playing safe, if you are wishy-washy about your thoughts, if your decision making is not very, very quick, don't think of enter trading. And it's not a 9 to 6 profile build. So there's something called work-life balance. Those two words don't exist in a trading environment. Monday to Friday, you'll work like crazy. Saturday, Sunday, you'll party hard, very, very hard. But very frankly, in a software role also, the 9 to 6 is just a figment of imagination. It doesn't exist anywhere. You have to really work hard from Monday to Friday. You have to work out as out. Saturday, Sunday, you can enjoy your life because you deserve to do that. And that's how everything else works. Why to single out trading only for this? Getting into derivatives, if someone asks you what is a derivative, you might get a very, very difficult answer like this one is a contract between two or more parties whose values is based on an agreed upon underlying financial asset or set of assets. So if you guys have seen Three Idiots, this is a Chatur answer. Chatur will give answers like this, but if we want to look at a Rancho answer, derivatives is something whose value lies on the underlying asset. For example, curd. Curd is a derivative of milk. If milk is bad, curd is bad. If milk is good, curd is good. So that's how you can understand derivatives. That's what derivatives is. Understand this example, anything whose value is dependent on what it is made of. Curd is made of milk, good curd, bad milk, bad curd. What is trading? Trading is simply buying or selling. Now, a lot of time people tell or ask me that how can I sell first in trading, which is also called shorting. How can I short first? For people who don't know, how can you sell first in trading? Because they say if I don't own the Infosys shares, or if I don't own oil, or if I don't own TCS shares, how can you sell it first? That is a very unique concept. It's called shorting in trading. Understand it like this, that in the auditorium of IIT Bombay or in your college, on the stage there is a small table which is kept, and you know no one uses this table at all, and you have done a research as far as your city is concerned that the furniture market is going to go down very sharply because IKEA is about to open its shop. Now you go to the director of your college and you say that you want to borrow this table for 2 weeks. Director knows that the table is of no use, tells you that as long as you can keep the table back in its position in 2 weeks, I don't have any problem. So director gives you the table, you borrow it from the college. You go and sell it in a local furniture store at say 5,000 rupees. Now, as you expected, IKEA opened the store in 4 days' time. And the moment IKEA opened, the sale of all the local stores crashed and everybody started going to IKEA, which is where the prices of furniture went down drastically. You went back to the same furniture store and you said, I want to buy that table. That furniture store sold you that table at 3,000 rupees, the same table which you actually sold it to him 4 days back. You buy the same table in 3,000 rupees and put it back in the auditorium. In the entire trade, you borrowed the table. You never had the ownership of the table. You first sold it and then you bought it back. And as per the agreement with the director, the table was back in its place within 2 weeks' time. This is called shorting, where you don't have it, you don't own it. Still, you can borrow it for a stipulated amount of time and you have to give it back within that stipulated amount of time. If you see this entire trade, you made money of 2,000 rupees. This is shorting. Now, a situation like this exists that your research was horrible. IKEA never opened. You sold the table for 5,000 rupees. Director has told you to put it back in 2 weeks' time. And after 13 days, when you go back to the furniture store, he says the table will cost you 8,000 rupees. But because you have entered into an agreement with the director, you have to buy it in 8,000 rupees and put it back in the auditorium. In this trade, you lose money. So whether you make money or you lose money is immaterial. Shorting is possible even if you don't own something because you can borrow it, provided you agree with the terms and condition for which it is borrowed. In this case, it was the time of 2 weeks as far as your director is concerned. So this is a very simple way in which shorting is described. Now, typically, you will say two words are synonymous to the markets: bullish and bearish market. But I hope all of you guys know why it is called bull and bear. Why is it not called horse and lion? It's called bullish because if a bull attacks you, it will flung you up in the air. It's called bearish because if the bearish attacks you, it will pin you on the floor. Bull pushes you up, bear pushes you down, and that's why the market are called bull and bear. If you are interested, you can search on internet. There are quite a few different words which are connected with markets, like hawk, like dove, like sheep, and they also have same connotation as bulls and bears. So sometimes you'll feel or you'll read or you'll hear that someone calls a person a dove, or probably a central bank head is called a hawk. Now, why exactly he or she is called a hawk? Read what hawk means and you'll understand why they call him hawk or why they call him dove. You'll understand those things if you read a little. Now, why do people trade? People typically trade for three things: hedging, speculating, and arbitrage. Now, what is a hedge? I already explained it to you. Hedge is where you try to minimize your losses. You trade between two different strategies and you minimize your losses. What is speculating? You have some information about something and you are speculating the market will go up or down, and as per the information, as per your understanding of the market, you take a position. What is an arbitrage? Arbitrage, basically the literal meaning of the word arbitrage means risk-free money. Typically, practically, arbitrage doesn't exist in the normal world, but still the word is arbitrage. In fact, in Indian market, arbitrage still exists, but international market arbitrage practically don't exist. I was I had a session with one of the top cricketers once, wherein he said that Shane Warne typically bowls a bad ball in October, and the next bad ball comes typically in April. There's a gap of 6 months, and he's playing in 6 months. Glenn McGrath also bowls it in November, and the next bad ball is probably coming next year, August. That's what arbitrage is. The opportunities are very, very less, but when they come, people go all in. And that's why I said in Indian market, it still exists. International market doesn't exist because international markets are highly, highly efficient markets. Indian markets are not that developed or that efficient. In fact, if I have to give you a very simple example, I don't know how many of you know, there is a lawn tennis tournament that happens in India also. It's called Sunfeast Open Chennai. The difference between Indian market and international market are Sunfeast Open Chennai, and Wimbledon Centre Court. The scale, the level, the efficiency of the game is at an absolutely different level when you go to Wimbledon or in international markets when compared to Sunfeast Open Chennai or Indian markets. That's how it works. So let us understand what exactly do we mean by all this with an example. Arbitrage. If you see, there's a thing, price of gold traded in COMEX. COMEX is an exchange, is $1325 per ounce. Now, price of the similar quality gold traded in MCX, another exchange, is 29,000 per 10 grams. This is a US exchange. This is an Indian exchange. And the US versus INR rate is rupees 60. It's a very old example. Now, what exactly do we mean by arbitrage? If we do the maths, it looks like this. 1 ounce is 28.35 grams. $1 is 60. 1325 per ounce is 79,500. Price of 28.35 gram is 79,500 as far as COMEX is concerned. If we do the same maths for MCX, 1 ounce is 28, 10 gram is, it's written 29,000, I'm sorry for 2,500 here, 28.35 is 83,633. So basically, if you buy in COMEX and you sell in MCX, you are buying low and you are selling high. You are probably making between them 4,133 rupees per trade. Per ounce you are making that amount of money. This arbitrage opportunity practically don't exist, and even if they exist, algo trading firms and quant trading firms absolutely milk them, because before a human eye can meet them or decode them, an algo trader or a bot or a quant trader completely sweeps it and makes a tremendous amount of money in inefficiencies or disparities like this, which might exist once or twice in a year or in a quarter between different exchanges. In Indian context, if you see, there are two equity exchanges, BSE and NSE, Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange. This disparity also happens over there, happens for probably even 10 paise, but people enter with huge volumes and they make a lot amount of money in probably just 4 to 5 minutes of time. That is called arbitrage. Now let's see what is hedge. If you see, FedEx, the most important commodity on which the entire business model of FedEx dependent is called oil. You know, typically when I will ask people what is FedEx, what do they do, they will say they are into courier business. Now it sounds so bad. I mean, a FedEx guy will sound so bad. A better way is that they are into logistics business, but they will just say brutally that they are into courier service. But think of it that you have put a package to be delivered in Bangalore by FedEx, and they say they will charge 200 rupees. Overnight, something happens in oil and oil prices go up by $20. Now, will FedEx call you and say that oil prices have gone up, you have to pay more? No, they will never do that. But they are very vulnerable to the pricing of oil. So what do? Can they buy oil? Can they buy millions of barrels of oil and keep store somewhere? No, they don't do that. What they do is they take counter positions in oil market. They know their daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly consumptions, and accordingly they take counter positions in oil market, so that if something happens as far as logistics business is concerned, they will make money because of the positions they have taken in the market, so their losses will be minimized. This is called hedging. I'm sure even you guys will be doing it. Once your campus placement is done by 10th of December, hoping everybody will be placed on day 1 or worst is day 2. After that, also next 6 months, probably you will try to better your placement by applying off campus. That's hedging, because you already have one position in your hand, you already have one job offer in your hand, and maybe you're trying to get better, make it better. Speculation. Markets are ripe with the news that the government is likely to announce measures to speed up infrastructure. You start up buying L&T, you buy Shapoorji Pallonji, you buy all the infrastructure stocks, because if this policy, which comes from the government body, gets in effect, these share prices will go up. So you have a news and you have a speculation that this will drive the prices up. So you take the position and you sit and you wait. The moment those decisions, those policymakers comes out with the decision, your trade will start giving you money. And this is what speculation is. As far as trading is concerned, you typically do speculation, but you do a very intelligent speculation. It's not a blind game. For example, here, when you have done this, First of all, you got the news, how you got the news, you decoded the news, what kind of effect will it bring in the market, and you accordingly buy, and you manage your buy position. How much are you buying? For what price are you buying? Till what price will you square off your trade? Those strategies need a very, very intelligent brain, and that's why if you see algo and quant trading people, they are very, very picky and choosy about people they are hiring or recruiting. They want the sharpest of brains who can actually do the minutest details calculation as far as these things are concerned on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Typically in a trading world, you are doing speculating, but you are doing a very, very intelligent speculation. Now, what are the different markets to trade? If you ask people, there are basically asset classes, and if I have to tell you, in the world there are only 4 asset classes to trade. You must have seen that someone trades equity, or there is a S&P 500, or energy, or gold, or oil, or someone is trading coffee, or soya bean, or cotton. So what exactly are these? So all these things are categorized under asset classes. There is equity, there is commodity, there is forex, and there is interest rate. These are the only 4 asset classes in the world to trade. So any product which is traded on an exchange and is regulated by a regulated body has to fall under these asset classes. If you see, I've given different box size to these. That's because this is the highest volume traded in the world. Forex. Commodity is the second highest volume. Interest rate is the third highest volume. Equity is the fourth highest volume. Unfortunately, in India, they don't make any noise. It's only the equity market, Sensex and Nifty, that makes noise. But if you see on a global level, equity is the least preferred asset class to trade. These are the asset class which has got higher volatility. These are the asset class which has got higher liquidity. And when there's higher liquidity, when there's higher volatility, there's more opportunity, and there is more ways to make money. And that's why people prefer them over equity any day. And this is how the volume distribution is done, typically between asset classes. Now, if I have to give you some example, what are the different products that are traded in equity? It could be shares, indices like Sensex, Nifty, Dow Jones, S&P. In commodity, it could be oil, gold, silver, coffee, wheat. In forex, it could be dollar versus rupees, pound, euro, dirham, sterling, whatever it is. Interest rate is repo rate, government bonds, municipal bonds, T-notes, things like that. These are the typical products that are traded. In fact, there are some very, very interesting products that are also traded in the world exchanges that probably you are not aware of. It could be, for example, butter. There used to be a point of time when I was friendly with someone who used to trade orange juice. Now there is milk, and they also have category: milk category A, milk category B, milk category C. I think this will come as a surprise to some of you guys. There is a product called Cyclone also. Imagine there is a product called Cyclone which you are trading in the market, and you are betting your money on Cyclone to come. The world will get damaged, but you will make money. In fact, I want you to picturize this, that when I was trading in a few years back, Cyclone Katrina had come. First of all, they named these cyclones amazingly. So Cyclone Katrina had come, and the moment Cyclone hit, I mean, somebody shouting, "Katrina is here," and everybody is turned. Where is she? Which is where the guy is saying it's actually the cyclone whose name is Katrina. I was also aware, it also happened with us that when we were trading, the massive, the nuclear thing that happened in Japan, on one of the very, very boring afternoons, it happened. And suddenly the market absolutely reacted drastically. I personally lost a lot of money. In fact, my entire office lost a lot of money. All my friends lost a lot of money. And because they lost a lot, they also lost. My pain was a little less. But we lost a lot of money, and we did not understand what happened because there is no news, nothing, and suddenly market has reacted horribly. After 10-15 minutes, the research analyst said that there is an earthquake in Japan exactly at the point where the nuclear site is, which has resulted into a very, very big disaster. Understood. We lost money. It's okay. It happens every day, and we went about our normal business. Around 4 or 5 months back, after that, another earthquake came near UAE. And very frankly, the moment earthquake came, our first question was, is there a nuclear reactor nearby? Because if there is one, then we know how to milk this earthquake. Frankly, we were not concerned about the damage. We'll talk about it later. Right now, let me make money because of this news. We'll talk about the damage and everything later. The moment the earthquake came, the first question was, is there a nuclear reactor nearby? So typically that's how, a trading world is. It's a very, very small, it's a very, very closed net group, but it's a very, very high potential group that you typically work with. So what helps to trade? Typically traders take care of technical analysis, which could be in the form of candlestick pattern. Fibonacci series, I'm sure you must have read in maths, but you will be amazed, you will be absolutely amazed to see the application of Fibonacci series in all the world markets. Pick up Sensex, pick up Nifty, pick up anything, and you'll be absolutely amazed the way Fibonacci gets implemented and gets executed over there. Then there could be fundamental analysis like, the big data like GDP, inflation, growth data and everything. And the biggest driver that drives everything is market psychology. Very frankly, these two becomes dormant. This is the biggest thing that drives the market, because technically if you see, markets is made of human brains. People like me and you make the market. People like me and you make the price. We drive the price up and we drive the price down. In fact, let us do something very, very interesting, and I'll give you a peep about how market psychology works. Let's make a market here right away. Let me show you a very interesting chart. Now here is a chart of oil. I want you to become a trader. All of you guys are trader right now, and you have traded this market, and today you are going, when the market is closing at 53.98, you went back home. At night, Syria and Iran went into a war, and US is also participating, and Iran is the place from where practically 60% of the global oil is coming, and it is completely in the middle of the war. So when the supply will get hit, the market will tend to go up. So my question to you is, tomorrow morning when you come to trade, what do you think will be the opening price as far as the oil market is concerned? Write it in the chat box. I will say everything again maybe. Okay, quite a few have you started writing. We have got 80, 60, 55, 60, 55, 80, 90, 50, 60, 57, 70, 85, 53.98, 100, 60, 65, 110, 70, 150, 54.1, 80, 75, 150, 67, 60, 60, 150. Lovely. Almost all of you think that it will be up. Okay, someone has written $500. Okay. Okay, super. Guys, I have been reading out all the answers. If you saw, I read all the answers, in which all the answers were like this: 50, 55, 65, 80, 72, 75, 79, 80, 95, 110, 54, 55, 53.98, 100, 100, 70, 55, everything. Now, why I was reading these answers, why I asked you this question was, if you see your answers, there is a pattern in every single answer. Of course, the pattern is everybody thinks it will go up, which is right. But if you observe the pattern, if you see this price ladder, every single price is in decimal points. There is no whole number here. But apart from probably 3 to 4 people, I have received probably 300-400 responses over here. Nobody wrote whole numbers. Nobody wrote decimal points. Everybody wrote whole numbers. That's what I'm trying to tell you by market psychology. It's made of human brains. None of you thought about this could be a another decimal number to open, because there is not a single whole number here. How can we have a whole number over there? But that's how we are programmed to think as human. We always think in whole numbers. And if you pick up any market of the world, when it is near a whole number, the market becomes jittery. And it's not market, it's the humans which are becoming jittery, because everybody has an affinity, everybody has a love towards whole numbers. When the market was around 40,000, Sensex was around 40,000, you could observe there was not much movement happening in the market, because people did not know, will it break 40,000 and go up, or will it come back to 37, 38,000? In a global scenario also, the whole number section is like those break in test matches. Just before lunch or after lunch, something happens. There is a psychological barrier over there. Just before tea or after tea, something happens. A wicket falls, or probably someone hits a good score, or whatever it is. Because typically, people are jittery around those times. This is one of those times as far as markets are concerned. So, whenever you are near a whole number, or whenever you see, or whenever you think that a market is at a whole number, if you can, just wait and watch. Something interesting is going on as far as that market is concerned. I used to do a classic experiment also, and maybe you can do it with your friends, your relatives, father, mother, brother, sister. Ask them to give a number. Just ask them a simple question, give a number. More often than not, you'll get a number between 0 to 9. When the number exists till infinity, they will say 7, they will say 6, they will say 9. Worst case, they will say 11, 13, 15. No one says 5,700 crores, 47 lakhs, 92,442. No one says like that. But typically, if you ask anybody for a number, they will limit themselves between 0 to 9. Again, a psychology that we are born with. We think the number exists, but only single digit exists till 0 to 9. Number exists till infinity. So this is something that I wanted to tell you about as far as psychology is concerned. And before starting this session, we did a small experiment in which some of your batchmates were involved. And what we did was we sent them an email. And I'm going to tell you what happened in that email. In that email, to one set of students, we sent this email. The content of email is exactly what is there in front of you right now. You won this chair in a competition and you want to sell it. What price would you sell it at? To the second set of students, we sent an email whose content was this. You own this chair and you want to sell it. What price would you sell it at? So the first set of students got, you won this chair in a competition and put a selling price. Second set of students got the same chair. You own this chair and you put a selling price. And we told them just write the selling price and send the mail back to us. I'll show you the response. The one who won the chair in the competition, the three students wrote 3,000, 5,000 and 1,500. And the one whom we said that you own the chair, the same chair, they wrote 15,000, 20,000 and 10,000. It was the same chair, same set of students, same college. The experiment was done right before the presentation started. What I'm trying to tell you over here is you tend to overvalue things if you own them, and it happens absolutely every day in the market. When people have some ownership, they have some shares, or they have bought oil, or they have bought gold, they tend to overvalue it. Before starting the trade, probably they thought that a price of 5 will go to 7. The moment they buy it, the moment they have an ownership of it, they start thinking this will not go to 7, this will go to 12. And this leads to a lot of opportunities in the market because people tend to overvalue it. In the trading world, there's a very interesting quote: plan the trade and trade the plan. Plan your trade and trade exactly the same plan. What people normally do is they do the first thing, they plan the trade, but the moment they have entered the trade, they don't trade the plan anymore. They tend to overvalue things. If you want, you can do this experiment with your friends, parents, uncles, whatever. You'll see something very, very amazing. You'll see a pattern. It could be that I might be wrong here, but this is an experiment that I have done hundreds of times, and you have to believe me, hundreds of times the pattern is exactly like this. They tend to overvalue the same thing. So very cool, interesting thing that you can try out at home. Maybe you'll have some fun over there. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but this is the bread and butter on which the entire trading world lives. OHLC. As a matter of fact, this session is called FINTRA. The finance session of Cantilever Labs is called FINTRA. I wanted to name it OHLC, but my son told me not to, because he said, if I don't know OHLC and if I have to attend this session, why do I have to rack my brain to understand what is this session all about? Keep the name very, very straight. Then you talk about OHLC in the session. So OHLC, for people who don't know, is like this. It's open, high, low, and close. OHLC is the bread and butter for any and every market of the world. If anybody asks you OHLC, you should be very, very clear that what exactly he or she is talking about. Open is basically a market. Now, this is the old candlestick used to be black and white. Now it is green and red. Typically, green is bullish, red is bearish, as the arrow shows. This is the upward going market. This is the downward going market. So market opened here, went up till here, went down up till here, and then closed here. So this is how it is. It doesn't have to close here. The market closed here basically. The body is made between open and close, but the points, the prices that the market touched were this and this. A low price of this was touched and a high price was touched during the trading hours, during the trading session on the day. So that's what OHLC is all about. We will not delve deep into candlestick because candlestick is a different animal to tame altogether and will take a lot of time. We just wanted to know about OHLC. For home, I'm giving you two things. You can read about it. There are amazing movies which are made on this. This man was responsible to make Bank of England go in front of him. George Soros. You can definitely read about it. And there is something very interesting called 5/8. I'm sure you don't know about it, but in the trading world, it's very famous and infamous. 5/8. You should definitely read about it. There are books written on this. There are documentaries made on this. But if you read, you will find it very interesting and fascinating. Guys, with this, I will be inviting the other speakers who will talk to you more about your career, what to do, what not to do as far as your career in finance is concerned. So Vivek is here with me. Vivek is a partner at Quad Eye. He's the head of equities department over there. One of your seniors, graduated in 2011. Vivek, over to you from here.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Avnish. And hello, good evening, guys.
Thank you.
Let me give me a moment, please. Can you see my screen now?
Vivek, they can still see my screen only.
Just a minute, sir. I'll make him the present.
Okay.
Vivek, please accept the request.
Okay, can you guys see my screen now?
No, not yet. We can see a black screen.
Now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Hello, guys. So my name is Vivek, and I've been a trader at Quad Eye for the past 9 years. Let me briefly talk about algo trading, and before that, let me speak a little bit about the stock exchanges that we have in India. So we have two major stock exchanges in India. One is BSE and the other is NSE. So BSE was founded in 1875, where it was an open outcry floor trading exchange earlier, where people would place their orders over phone calls and brokers will try to match them with others. You guys must have seen it in a movie or internet. It was a huge mess. So in 1992 and in 1995, NSE was formed, and both these exchanges, they converted into an electronic trading system, wherein now you could manually punch in your orders through internet. But of course, people didn't have internet, so they would call their brokers and they would do it for you now. But on the rear side, the exchange would match them electronically now. Now, in 2010, the HFTs have started their dominance in Indian markets, and that's the time also where Quad Eye started to trade in Indian market. And all over the world, all the stock exchanges in the world are now electronic. So, and in the present year, people have their apps in their mobile to directly punch in orders. Once you punch in your trade, your order is directly routed to the exchange, and same information is broadcasted to every participant in the market, sending them information about any activity or any price change that is there in the market. There's so much data today that, just to give you an example, NSE alone sends about 50 gigabytes of data on a daily basis. And this is where algo trading comes in. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of information for human mind to process and react to. So what exactly is algo trading? Algo trading is nothing but a setup wherein or you can send the order into the market in an automated process, through an automated process. There is no manual intervention. So you get the data from the market, your infrastructure processes it, then your strategy makes some decisions based on it, and then you place your order in the market. So and this algo trading, this it allows you to make calculations on this large amount of data, and it lets you capture any inefficiency or probable opportunities in the market. So if we speak on a broad level, there are two divisions or requirements in algo trading. One would be your infrastructure, which will be required to establish different connections with the exchanges, which lets you process the market data and also lets you send orders to it. And for HFTs, this infrastructure needs to be the most optimized and efficient system ever, because speeds becomes extremely important. On the second division that we're talking about, algo trading, comes your strategy part, wherein you need to have sound financial models and quantitative strategies that can predict the price movements in the market, and which can help you make money in the market, which is the main goal over here. So that's what the setup of algo trading is all about. So let me quickly get into, what is the, how does one create a strategy. So first you do a little bit of market research, wherein you try to find opportunities in the market. It can be something very simple like arbitrage, where there's simple price difference between two markets, or it can be complex ones like price of one stock, like Avnish mentioned earlier. FedEx has inverse correlations with crude price, and it can still have a positive correlation with US index, let's say S&P 500 index. That's correlation, but it's not always true. So you work on probabilities here. So once you have identified some opportunities, now you try to develop strategies on it. You decide the order flow, you decide the risk exposure you are willing to take, and then you try to simulate it on the historical data that you have. So once you have simulated, then you try to identify the losses, and then you, based on that, you try to improvise your strategy. And then once you have a profitable strategy in your simulations, you try to productionize it, and then you try to assess and remove any bugs that's there in your strategy. And this is the cycle that we follow. So once it's into production, we monitor it regularly, and we see if it's making money as expected, well and good. Otherwise, we see if it requires any changes, or if it can potentially make more money. We try to find those opportunities, and this cycle continues. And of course, in HFTs, we always work very closely with the systems team to be the fastest in the market, because for HFTs, it is extremely important to be the fastest in the market. So let me talk about a little bit about the pros and cons of algorithmic trading. So pros is algorithmic trading allows you to be the fastest in the market. So like Avnish has earlier mentioned in his example of arbitrage, where 1 ounce of gold was trading at 79,000 in one market and 83,000 in the other market. So manual traders are not going to capture that arbitrage anymore. It is heavily captured by HFTs nowadays. So another pros I can talk about is, once you have decided and you have coded the rules, you have done your hard work, now you can simply be drinking your beer or coffee and make your strategy make money for you. How cool is that, right? So you don't have to be on the screen all the time monitoring the markets, because that's what your strategy is going to do. Of course, you need to build your strategy such that it is capable to handle all the possible scenarios. And another pros that I can talk about it is you can make more transactions with your code. A manual trader will perhaps try to buy, let's say, give you an example, buy crude at $40 and sell it off at $41. He makes $1. He does that in 5 minutes time. But an automated strategy can perhaps try to buy at $40 and sell it at $40.1, making only 10 cents. But it will try to do that 1,000 times in 5 minutes. So the profit went up from $1 for a manual trader to $100 for algorithmic trading. So that's the scale we are talking about. Also, a manual trader will be sending more like 4 to 5 orders max in a minute, whereas an algo trading can be sending up to 5,000 orders in a second. So that's the scale that algorithmic trading provides you. That's the advantage that it gives you over manual trading. And also it gives you a lot of scalability. Like Avnish has earlier mentioned that in your earlier years, a trader works on 2 to 3 different products, but eventually also one cannot be working on many products, because then he doesn't have as much eyes and as many hands and as many brains to process them all the time, right? So just to give you an example, my own strategies, they run in Japan, they run in Australia, they run in India, and even in Brazil. And what I have to do is sip my coffee and don't have to look at 10 different screens. I have to just look at one screen to monitor them. So that's the advantage that we are talking about in algorithmic trading. Of course, it comes with a lot of negatives as well. It is heavily dependent on technology, and hence vulnerable to any glitches. It has become a tech race for speed. Everyone wants to be the fastest. People have gone crazy about it. People are drawing internet lines across the Atlantic Ocean. There's an internet line called Hibernia across the Atlantic Ocean from New York to Europe, and it costs around $6 million a year. So that's 44 crores a year for just one internet line. So people are buying homes and land so that they can draw straight internet lines between different cities. They are setting up towers so that they can send data in a straight line through microwave. So they are setting up tower in city A and city B so they can send unobstructed data in a straight line to be the fastest. So things have gone crazy in that direction. It is really crazy. So also on the con side, I would like to mention it is vulnerable to bugs. So I will give you an example of a incident that happened with an HFT firm in 2012. In a span of just 30 minutes, Knight Capital, it's a trading firm, it lost in 30 minutes, it lost $440 million. So you can imagine the scale at which things can even go wrong. It can blow up, right? So these are some of the cons that are already there, and there, of course, there's risk of overfitting and optimization and unidentified bugs, which can take you to big losses and compliance issues. So yeah, as mentioned, algo trading needs both tech and quant to work hand in hand to move. So I guess Ayush will be throwing some light into it now. But meanwhile, this is just an example how your life as a quant trader is like. I think it's pretty much self-explanatory, but the sixth picture is where I am usually at when your strategies are expected to make money, but they really don't. It's not an easy task to do at the end of the day. Yeah. So I think Ayush will be the best person to take over from here, and he will guide you as to how to help yourself get placed in an HFT firm.
Vivek,
Thank
in
you,
fact,
guys.
yeah, Vivek, in fact, I would like to add, what you spoke about your life as a quant trader. When I started my trading career, and I used to trade interest rate futures of US, UK, and Eurozone. So my father would always try to understand what exactly am I doing, and it took him 3 years to understand that he cannot understand what exactly are we doing. So he gave up. He was happy that we are making money. I'm happy I'm making money, and that's all mattered. Yes, Ayush.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ayush, and now, since we have seen what finance is, we have understood the basics of trading, we have seen what algo trading is. Let's now go through algo trading as a career option. So, how can you get into this role of a quant trader or a quant researcher, and how can you prepare yourself for the interviews or for your career path ahead? Fine. Okay. So, now all of us here being engineers, mostly software engineers, we have two very clear paths ahead of us. We have the traditional software development path, and we have this interesting quant role part. So let us first understand which of these two paths is better for you personally, because both of these paths are very different in respect to the expectations and the requirements that you need to have. At the same time, the career trajectories of both these paths are very different. Now, which part is better for you depends on your personal situation and your personal goals. So in this following section, I will give you a brief intro about some of the major factors that should help you in finding the and making the right decision between taking a software development role and taking a quant role. Fine. Okay, so to understand the differences between a quant role and a software development role, let me tell you two short stories. So the first one uh, is I remember it very clearly. It was the first day of my internship at AlphaGrep, and basically the VP of my team, he called me and he said that, okay, I'm sharing some data with you, and we want some particular outputs. I cannot share the details, but so I had some inputs and I wanted to get some outputs. Go figure out the results. So I did the thing that needed to be done. I combed through the data, I devised the algorithm, implemented it, and tested it. Once I saw that everything is working fine, I shared the code with him that, okay, this is the thing. Please let me know if any changes are required. So this was in the afternoon sometime. Okay, so around 1 p.m., 2 p.m. And then later in the evening, I messaged him that, do you require any changes or something? And his response was that I have uploaded it on the servers and it is running on our live servers already. It increased our computation efficiency a lot. Thanks for the work. Great job. So understand that this is the first day of an intern, not even a full-time role. And the code that I had written, the analysis pipeline that I had made, was running on their live servers on the very first day. Now, to compare this, I will tell you a short incident, a short internship experience of one of my friends who worked at a big tech firm in India. So there, his entire project for the entire summer of 2 to 3 months was to add just one feature in the search engine of that particular company. And he himself told me that that entire project would not have taken him more than 2 to 3 weeks had he done it independently. But when he did that project in that company as an intern, it took him 2 to 3 months. Now, there are multiple reasons why this happened. The main reason why this happens in a big tech firm is because in any big tech firm, be it Google or Facebook or Amazon or anyone else, there is a lot of strict hierarchy there. That is, whenever you join as an intern or a fresher as a junior developer, you whatever code you write, it must be reviewed by some senior engineer, and they will give you some feedback. You will make the changes, and this iterative process of improvement will keep on going for a few weeks, and finally when the senior engineer is satisfied with your code, then only will it go towards the testing phase. Then there will be an entire testing phase on your code, and if your code satisfies all those conditions, then only will it be actually sent to the main code base. So this entire process, this entire hierarchy that exists in any big firm, this makes the entire process of product development or software development really slow. But if you compare it with my example of an HFT, here the things that you make, any algorithm or any analysis pipeline that you make, you design it end to end. You are the developer, you are the implementer, and you are the tester. So if anything goes right, you get the reward for that. If anything goes wrong, you get the blame for that. There is no one else taking care of that. No one will review your code, no one will check it and tell you, give you any feedback on that. So what I want to compare between these two is this, that in any HFT, you will always have a much higher chance of taking on more responsibility, or you will have much higher expectations from the team, and the team will have much higher expectations from you. So to summarize these two stories, if you look at the differences between the quant profiles and the software profiles, the most important difference is that there is a very fast feedback in quant roles. That is, whatever you develop, it will be sent to production immediately, same day, next day. There is no other checking mechanism in between or filter to delay the process. At the same time, as I said, that since you have more opportunities to take on responsibility, your skill development will also be faster. The more responsibility that you take, the more will be your skill development, the steeper will be your learning curve, and the more will be your growth, both in terms of your skills and in terms of your compensation, etc. Okay, so as we all know that one of the major attractions of any quant role in an HFT is that they have better payouts both in the short term and in the long term as compared to an SD role. Okay, so these are some of the main attractions of a quant role in an HFT. Now let us look at some of the main positives or main attractions that a software role gives us at a big tech firm. So the first and the most important thing is that, as I said, that you have much higher expectations from you. The team will have much higher expectations from you, both in respect to the quality of the work and also the quantity of the work, which directly translates to the fact that you will have to put in more hours at an HFT as compared to a product development role at a big tech firm. So this basically means that if you join as a product developer at any big tech firm, you will have much more relaxed deadlines. You set your own deadlines. You will not have any restrictions with that, and you will be able to work at a much slower and much relaxed pace as compared to that at an HFT. So that is the first key difference between the two roles, that you will work in a much more relaxed environment. The second thing that a big tech firm offers you is that it gives you a brand equity, in the sense that if you work at any big tech firm, be it Google or Amazon or anything, and let's say after 10 years or 15 years you think of pivoting to starting your own business, or you start going into some other field, then when you write in your bio that you write ex Google or ex Amazon or something, that carries a weightage, that gives you a brand equity. Just like you have an IIT tag, right? That gives you a brand equity in front of other people. The same thing happens whenever you join a big tech firm, but this brand equity is not provided by any HFT, because HFTs usually tend to be much smaller sized firms. Fine. Okay. Another very important attraction of any big tech firm is the extra perks that you get. So if you join any firm, for example, if you join Google, you will have 3 meals per day and 24/7 you have a canteen there. You will have yearly vacations, all of that. So all these extra perks that you have will be available to you in any big tech firm, which will be absent in an HFT. But HFTs will more than compensate for that by giving you hard cash. Okay, so it is your own choice whether you prefer cash or whether you prefer work, or whether you prefer higher responsibilities or you prefer a relaxed work environment. Now coming to your responsibilities, the main difference will be that a quant profile will be mostly focused on building financial models, statistical models, financial models, and developing strategies for trading in the market. But an SD role at a tech firm will be mostly focused on algorithmic optimization and maintenance of the pre-existing code base. Fine. So these are some of the major factors that you can take into consideration before making this decision. Now let's say you decide that okay, I want to go into quant roles. Now how do I get into quant roles? So what are the skill sets that I should focus on or develop to crack the quant interviews, and what are the skill sets that will help me in progressing through these roles? So to put it simply, a quant interview preparation is basically a superset of your basic SD preparation. So whatever you prepare for a normal SD role, that must be done. That is a prerequisite. So to quickly summarize them, as we all know, the basics of the SD prep are data structures and algorithms, operating systems, computer networks, database management, distributed system, and system designs. So these are the basic topics or the basic concepts that we must be good at for any SD role interview, right? If you want to enter a quant role, you must be good at these, but along with that, you should also be good at some of the other skills, which include firstly statistics, or especially the probability and the maths part of that. Secondly, if you are good at data science and machine learning side, it will be a great help for you in the interviews, because many of the skills that we learn in data science or ML are actually directly applied when we are training and deploying strategies. Okay, other than that, if you are good at financial modeling with statistical modeling or otherwise, that will also be a really good boost to your resume. And lastly, if after doing all of this you still have some time left, then if you can show that you have interest in the market, in the financial market, be it by reading some financial news, by reading some financial articles, or by following the major trends in the market, how a particular stock is behaving. So if you can show that you have some interest in the market, then that will obviously give you a good boost to your resume, and also to your interviewer, that your interviewer will remember you, that okay, this guy knew something other than just simple programming or data science or machine learning. That will also be a big boost to your resume and your interview preparation. Other than these, there are a lot of other things that you can do. So if you want to explore more than this, and let's say you have less time, then there are a lot of courses and trainings online that you can take part in or invest in, and that will also help you a lot in boosting your interview preparation. Okay, so some of these courses are taken by even Cantilever Labs itself, so they host some really good courses for these interview preparations, which will really help you in cracking these interviews. Okay, so that's pretty much about it. How do you crack an interview and how do you prepare for that? And so prepare well for that, and be assured that you will definitely get whatever job you want to get. Okay, you are from a very good college, and if you put in the time, if you put in the required preparation, you will definitely clear it. There is no doubt in that. Now, since we have discussed SD roles in a tech firm and quant roles in an HFT, there is a midway between the two, that is an SD role at an HFT. So now Milind will take you through what does an SD or a system designer do in an HFT. Okay, over to you, Milind.
Yeah, thank you. Can you switch the presentation to me? Hello? Could you switch the presenter rights to me?
Hi, Milind. 1 minute.
Yeah, can you see the screen?
Yes, Milind, your
Yes.
screen is visible.
Yeah, so let's start. So Ayush has told you what a systems engineer is. It's a midway between a proper product company SD role and a quantitative role. So I'll start by telling you what my typical day looks like. So it's basically divided into these four things. I'll explain all of them except the last one. So the first part of it is project work. So what does project work mean? So it basically means that I write new features which might be to do with compliance, or it might be to do with new regulations introduced by the exchanges. It might be latency improvements or improvements to the functions we provide to the strategists. And of course, it might be bug fixes or stuff like that, which is basically technical debt. Yeah, so we'll explore in more detail what exactly do latency improvements and features mean. So essential goal, like if you strip away everything, the essential goal of a systems engineer is to speed up these four processes, right? So the exchange sends some market data that there are some new orders or there is some trade. It serializes it into a sequence of bits. So you need to parse those bits with like maximum efficiency. So that's what I mean when I say parse market data. So once you have it converted into a common form, you know whether it's a trade or it's a new order, you update some data structures. So we maintain like a book of all the open orders, all the open buy and the open sell orders. So you update this book and hand this data to the strategist. So the strategist can make their decision and choose whether or not to react to this market data. Right. Suppose the strategists react to this market data. So they're like, we need to make an order. You buy 10 stocks of Reliance at 100 rupees. Right. So to send this order, they have to go through two functions. So the first of them is a risk check. So suppose accidentally the strategy sends something like we want to buy 10 stocks of 100 stocks of Reliance at 100 rupees rather than 10 stocks of Reliance at 100 rupees. So this risk check will detect this, and this also has some compliance related risk checks. So we try to keep this separate from the strategy. So the mistakes in the strategy don't carry over, and we don't end up with a situation where we have made a lot of wrong trades or we have ended up with a big loss, because this risk check limits the loss you can possibly have. So this prevents like the worst case situations. And after that, finally, you have a function to send the order. So just like the market data, the exchange expects the order to be in a specific serialized form. So you take whatever the strategist has given you and turn it into a sequence of bits which the exchange can understand. So the main objective is to speed up all these things. So suppose you can partially apply the risk check before the strategist is sending his or her order. So you do that. Or if you can partially serialize the order before the order is finalized, you do that. So let's go into the details of how exactly you optimize them. So first of all, the hot path from market data to sending an order. It does not involve any super complex algorithms because those are usually even O log n or ON. You don't involve, there's no n to speak of. There's just one linear code path which you need to optimize a lot. So the constant time is way more important than the big O complexity of this. So how do you improve that? So compilers are pretty smart these days. So GCC, Clang, ICC, they have a lot of they optimize your code a lot, but you need to give them certain hints. So marking a member constant or using hinting a function is inline. So that helps him optimize, and you can really see the results. So after that, you can use Linux kernel flags, or you can have a custom build of some distribution to optimize your particular results for your strategy. So you can try out different OSs and see which one works the best for you. Right. So that's another thing you can do. Then there's another thing that the driver code takes a lot of time. So to interact with the network card or something, usually it goes through the entire Linux kernel. So to avoid that time, you can also interact directly with it. You can bypass the kernel and write your sort of your own driver with it to directly talk to it, and this also makes a lot of impact. So to just give you an idea of what scales I'm talking about, in like a fast strategy, the hot path, the market data to the sending order path could be about 2000 or 3000 nanoseconds. So even if you make an improvement of 100 or 50 nanoseconds, it's a big thing. It matters. It makes a difference in the profit and loss of that strategy. So yeah. So let's talk about the second aspect of a systems engineer life. So it's operational work. So it's inevitable that something will go wrong because there are so many strategies running and there are so many servers. So sometimes there's a bug in the strategy, there's a misconfiguration. Sometimes the box crashes. So every hour that the strategy is not running is an hour you are not making money. So you try your best to handle these issues in real time as quick as you can. So you need to identify these issues and provide either a temporary fix or a permanent fix on the spot. So that also takes quite a lot of your time. So that's what is termed as operational work, right? And thirdly, of course, you have meetings and code review and discussions about further improvements or stuff like that. All right. So what skills do you need to be a good system engineer? So the first is obviously you need to be proficient in C++. So all the HFTs I know of, they use C++ because it's sufficiently high level. It's not like C, and at the same time, it's not like Java where you have a virtual machine or it compiles straight down to binary code. Right? Then the second thing is scripting. So when I came to the firm, I was honestly really surprised that everyone in the firm, from the quantitative strategist to the systems engineer, they could all script pretty well. So they could write a bash for loop without like referring to Stack Overflow. So I can do it now, but for the first month, I was really impressed that scripting is really quite important. So it brings up systems very quickly once you have the binaries ready. Right. After that, you need to have a working knowledge of like hardware organization and operating systems. So you need to know, you need to keep thinking about stuff like a cache miss can happen, or how much cache should be utilized by your process and stuff like that. So you need to keep it in the back of your mind while coding. So after that, you need to have some knowledge of networking because you will be configuring and you will be helping other people configure network cards, switches. So, and also you'll be working on some of the low-level code which bypasses the driver. So it's also good to have at least some knowledge of networking. And finally, the non-tech thing you need, that you need to be able to deal with 2 or 3 operational issues in real time, and you need to be calm while dealing with them. And at the same time, you need to be really fast at solving those issues, because as I said, every hour a strategy doesn't trade is an hour which it doesn't make money. Right. So we also talked briefly about what skills you need in an interview to be a systems engineer. So one thing I'm happy about, that the skills you need on the job and the skills you need in the interview are very, very similar. So you need to be able to write C++ in the interview. You should have a good knowledge of OS, networking, and organization. And it's a bonus if you already know a scripting language like Bash or Python or Perl. And apart from that, obviously, you need to be able to write algorithms and data structures, right? So after that, we'll have a basic comparison of what a systems engineer in an HFT does versus a SD in a product company. So the first thing is, like, the technologies used are usually completely different. So most applications in today's world are based off the web. So the technologies used in a product company are likely to be front and back end development and stuff like that, and databases and stuff like that. But in HFTs, you will be working on more OS or a lower level in terms of tech stacks. You'll be working on a lower level, interacting more directly with the hardware. And now the second thing is that in product companies, you often use frameworks or libraries. So the point of frameworks and libraries is that you cut down on the man hours you need to devote to develop a product, and libraries are well tested and you can just use them. But the point is that libraries are general purpose, and the more general purpose they are, the slower they're likely to be. So in HFTs, we prefer to write our own in-house code for almost everything to get the maximum possible speed we can. So is another difference between a product company and an HFT, that there are no customers in an HFT. There's no product you're having. So on one hand, you don't get like customers feedback, or you don't get feature requests or stuff like that. But at the same time, there's no customer support or escalations, and you're not remotely connecting to the customer machine and debugging something. So there's nothing like that. And after that, I think Ayush mentioned it a little bit, that there's a completely different testing, release, and deployment process. So for like a browser like Mozilla Firefox, so they have development cycles. So after a point, they'll have feature freeze. They won't allow you to commit anymore. And then after that, they'll test it almost every day. They'll have a beta release. They'll have a release candidate, and then they'll slowly roll out the release. But in an HFT, I can write code today and deploy it tomorrow. So obviously, a good thing is that you get to deploy it fast, and the bad thing is the 40% operational issues time you have to spend on this, right? So that's about it. Yeah.
Thanks, Milind. Thank you so much. Guys, so that was all about how to make a career as far as quant trading is concerned. We are here, we can take few questions. Vivek, Milind, Ayush, all are here. So if you guys have any questions, you can write it on the thing. Okay, we already have 2 questions. Vivek, would you like to answer this? I'll tell the question.
I cannot.
I'll tell you the question. So we have a question from Sarvesh. Yes, how long is a normal day in a quant trader's life?
How long? So if we talk about mean and median, it would be around about 11 hours. 10 to 11
Is it
hours.
typically 5 days? Is it 5 days a week, 7 days a week, or is it 8 days a week?
5 days a week on the screen. Remaining time it's on your mind.
Remaining time is?
Like you have some of the other strategies going on in your mind.
Okay, I just for a second I heard remaining time is in the bar. Okay, yeah. We have another question from Avishi. Are these roles primarily for CSE students?
are we talking about the quant role or the tech role? The tech role is definitely more suitable for CSE guys. And of course, we have people from electronics and other department as well in the tech role. But speaking of quant role, one of our top traders is from mechanical engineering. So I think that answers the question. But again,
Okay, so
I would like to add that at the end of the day, we do have to do a lot of data analysis and scripting, and everything boils down in the form of code, right? It's an algo trading setup, so everything that you do is in some or the other form of code only. So you have to be really good at coding. So, but
okay,
that
so
is something that's not a very prerequisite. If you have a solid grade in CS 101 course, then that should be enough as well.
Avishi, if we have to answer, you don't need to be a CSE student, but you need to be very strong in coding. Vedant, we will not be able to talk about option trading. We'll have to stay here all night if I have to talk about option trading. So not in this session, maybe some other session. Okay, we have a question from Piyush. How is it different to work as a quant researcher in an HFT versus an hedge fund?
Okay, I think you would be a better person to talk about how would we.
Okay,
it is in a hedge
very
fund.
frank. Yeah. So I'll just see who. Piyush, typically the way it works, the fundamental difference won't be big, but the volume of trade that is happening between an HFT versus hedge fund will be very, very different. You know, a hedge fund will go into a market with a huge volume typically. A lot of amount of dollar is riding on that trade. And HFT is typically, by the name of it, it is high frequency. So HFT is like that singles and doubles that ones keep on taking, and ones keep on taking the cash register, keep on making money. Hedge fund will probably enter once, like a big animal, enter the trade, move the entire market, make some money, and move out of it. Entry exit is less, but the role would be same typically. What level of knowledge of finance is expected? So, Vivek, I think you will be there in IIT Bombay this December for recruitment also. So maybe Kanishka is asking that what, in fact, not only IIT Bombay and all the other IITs also, you'll be there for recruitment. So the question is, what level of knowledge of finance is expected for quant trading?
So I think I would answer it this way, that I had primarily zero knowledge about stock markets before I got into quad. So I was working with Microsoft for 6 months before joining here, and any knowledge that I have about financial markets is something that I learned on the job. But having said that, if you have to be, it is always beneficial if you are inclined towards that, or if you are like really good with numbers. So, yeah.
Okay. Utkarsh has asked, is there any non-coding finance profile? Yes, Utkarsh, quite a few companies come. Futures First is there, Axela is there, and they are also into trading. They are and they come with non-coding finance pro. Excellent companies, excellent people to work with. Great team in both the companies. So definitely there. I can name you one more company. It's there in Bombay. It's called OSTC. So these are few companies that you can look for. I think Axela and Futures First will be definitely there as far as IITs are concerned. OSTC, I'm not too sure. Okay. We have one more question, a big one. Why did you mention that do not enter a quant researcher role right out of college? What is the reason for that? As I had read that quant researcher are essentially the ones that make the strategies while the traders do the real-time implementation. So does someone with a background in pure CS research suitable for a quant research role? Vivek?
To answer that, I think I would say to be a quant researcher, you need to have good knowledge and good experience about the financial markets. And only once you have, decent amount of experience will you be able to make a good researcher. Yeah. So it's not advisable to be, because you would be pretty much clueless to look for clues in the data, right? You would not know what to look for, what can be your leading indicators. You would not know that. Only once you have gained decent amount of experience is when you would be able to figure them out quickly and make sense out of them. Yeah.
Ashok, the question is how do prepare for a trading interview? It will be very difficult to give you an answer just like that. Very frankly, we'll be doing something wrong to your preparation if we just say it like that. It's a whole lot bigger game. We will not answer that here. Are these firms open to MTechs as well? Is age a factor? You can talk about algo and quant, Vivek. I'll talk about the manual trading. Are you guys open to MTechs?
We are actually open to MTechs. We don't really have MTechs right now, but it's not that we are against the idea. We have been taking their interviews, and unfortunately, nobody is here yet. But yeah, we are open to be interviewing MTechs, and age is not a barrier.
Hari, I can say you by experience as far as other trading firms are concerned. I personally used to come to all the IITs, NITs, few bits and all, and we used to interview everybody, BTechs and MTechs. If I have to tell you the demography inside a trading firm, it's heavily biased and skewed towards BTechs. Heavily biased. There is no written rule, there is no protocol that MTechs cannot come. But typically, I have not seen many MTechs entering a trading firm or a quant firm for a reason that I could not understand. Typically, they don't crack the interviews. Okay, Ameya will take this last question and then we'll call it a day. What skills do the non-coding trading profile looks like in the candidate? Do skills in data analytics, ML play a major role in these profiles? Again, the answer to this question is similar to the one that was asked before. It is difficult to talk about because it's a very long and detailed thing. Maybe you can connect with all of four of us or one of us on LinkedIn and we can discuss it over there. Okay, we'll take one last one. How can I make a job switch to a HFT quant if I'm placed in an ML profile at the beginning? Vivek or maybe Milind, if you want to answer. Unmesh has asked, how can I make a job switch to a HFT quant if I'm placed in an ML profile at the beginning?
The answer would be, every company, every HFT company has a job portal, and wherein you can go to the careers, and that's the usual route. Otherwise, they are headhunters, and you can approach headhunters for openings in HFTs, or even companies. They hire headhunters to look out for candidates who are looking for jobs in this profile, and then of course the interview process is very similar to that that happens in in your regular placements.
Vivek, in fact, in this question, I will sell. In fact, it's not selling cantilever labs. We don't do anything. But Unmesh, at any point of time, if you think that you want to switch and you want to get connected to the top HFT firms in the country, I am connected to all of them. This is not a business that we do in,
Yes.
but at any point of time, if you need help, Vivek is the partner at Quad IC. We are connected, and like that, most of the firms, I am personally very well connected. If you need any help, drop in a line on LinkedIn. I will see your profile. Depending on it, I will send your resume to the right people. Good. Thank you so much, guys. I hope we made some sense. I hope your time dedicated for this session was worth it. It is always lovely speaking to you guys. Thank you so very much. All the very best. And take good care of yourself and everybody around you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.